Hey everyone, welcome back to the Urban EV Podcast. I'm Rob Hoffman along with my co-host Scott Murphy, and so glad you're here joining us today. If you're passionate about EVs, charging infrastructure, and user experience, then make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. And no matter which podcast platform you're tuning into, a reminder that we're also available on YouTube for a more visual experience. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the most complex and fascinating frontiers in transportation, autonomous driving. And joining us are two guests who live in the intersection of it all. Bob Granito, president of IVP Research Labs, and Bill Thau, director of technology and analytics. IVP Research Labs has been quietly conducting comprehensive research studies with some of the leaders in the field, analyzing how autonomous systems perform in the real world and what needs to happen next for autonomy to scale safely and intelligently. We'll talk about what their data actually reveals, what's hype, what's reality, and how it all connects to the EV transition. Bob, Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Rob. Great to be here. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you both take a moment to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Bob Granito, president of IVP Research Labs. We specialize in behavioral and emotional data collection.
And I'm Bill Thau, the director of analytics, and I work with the data and the data collection and things like that, and trying to come up with the meaning behind whatever we get in the field.
All right, fine. So why don't we all start here with the big picture? Can you both tell us how IVP conducts its research and how you ended up specifically in automotive autonomy?
So, we're not really a research company. We're in the research field, but we're the technology arm of the research industry, right? So we work with end clients, meaning, it could be a car manufacturer, but we also work with the majority of research consultants, right? So at some point in the research process, we get involved in the discussion, right? Sometimes we are at the top of the food chain, meaning we're at the onset, and we have some input into the research itself and how it's going to be collected. And other times we're at the bottom of the food chain, where we're just brought in at the last minute, unfortunately, to provide technology for the client so they could understand the experience behind the actual user that the research is being conducted with.
Okay, so that's the technical side of things, but can you get very specific and granular about what kind of data you're actually collecting in these studies?
Sure. So every project is different for our clients, right? So the big question that we ask way up front, if we have the opportunity, is what are you trying to learn from the research, right? So we're going to identify a case study today where we worked with a large auto manufacturer, right? And they just released their autonomous driving application in their cars, right? And they wanted to learn if there was stress levels when someone drove the car and when the car drove them. So that was the initial objective of the research. So we took that and we said, okay, here's what we can use from a technology standpoint to help you understand that user experience. So we outfitted a car with multiple cameras, so we could see the respondent. We had a camera shooting from the back so we could see where they were driving. And we had them connected to facial coding to capture their emotional response. And we had biometrics connected to their fingers to capture the levels of arousal as they were driving or when the car was driving them. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Bill in case I left something out and Bill wants to
that was pretty good, Bob. I mean, that's really the gist of it. At the base, this is a usability test, right? We want to know what the come up with a multifaceted approach to get as much information from either a self-report as they're talking to a moderator, to heart rate and skin conductance and things like that, because it is to some degree, it is an emotional type of experience, right? As you're driving, there are different levels of stress. There's certainly different levels of attention. I can think of times when I've found myself at work and forgotten how I got there, because I was driving on quote, autopilot mentally. And we really look to explore in that space. The traditional, hey, let's put somebody on a video and ask them questions is still very much applicable. But when it comes to things like this in the real world, as someone's going through the experience, talking about the levels of excitement you may have or fear, it can be tough for people to articulate. If I say, on a scale of 1 to 100, how excited were you? It might be hard for some people to say, and then also think about doing that for a 45-minute driving experience. If you're collecting that data as a live stream, you can go back and look at particular bumps and jumps in the data and see what happened. Versus if you're asking someone after the experience is over, you're only going to learn from what they remember.
And I
So
I
assume the
also think
bio.
one thing,
Yeah,
I've
go
been
ahead.
doing consumer research for like a huge portion of my career in the advertising business. So this is super interesting to me. The one thing I always talk about when I talk about consumer research in general is people lie.
Oh, no
People
doubt.
might say they might say, oh no, I wasn't nervous or any of that. But if you have hard, data where you're collecting actual biometric information about them, you can't lie, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
now, it's funny you say that because when we talk about this technology, everybody always goes to the polygraph test because they've seen it on TV and all this and in different legal cases. What we do is similar, but it's certainly not a lie detector test. And in the years of doing this, in the 10, 12, however many years I've been at this, one of the things that I've learned is there is a lot of variance in the way people's physiology is just naturally. So there are adjustments that need to be made. But to your point, sometimes there's more to uncover that I don't want to necessarily say someone's lying, but it's just they're unable to properly communicate it, and sometimes there's a little bit of bias where they tell a researcher what they want to hear. And this is definitely something. The technologies that we use are certainly tougher to fool, if I can put it that way. So.
And just out of curiosity, do you typically have a baseline with the same user here drive a non-autonomous vehicle, drive on your own? And now let's compare it to when you're actually behind the
Yes.
wheel of the car driving you.
A/B testing has been, the UX standard for years and years and years. So for this particular one, we had actually this one and ones we've done previously. We've done a few of these. There's a control where they go through and do a control task with a controlled driving loop, and then the follow-up is the testing condition with the autonomous system. And in both cases, it's exactly the same except the one variable being application of the system um, versus the self-drive. Now, there is another factor in this as well, which we see as it is at its base a usability test. Is not only are we getting the emotional reaction to the respondent or driver using the system and what it's like to have your hands hovering over the wheel while you're watching it change lanes next to an 18-wheeler. It's also the application of the system itself, and that's something that I thought about as we were designing this and running this study. And it wasn't until I was getting into the data when I realized that these people are owners of this brand of vehicle, and they were screened in knowing that, hey, I paid for the adaptive cruise control and the monthly subscription or whatever, and they still kind of struggle to use it. And it was one of those, all right, turn the cruise control on, and they're fumbling with the stalk trying to figure out how to make it work. And they weren't sure why it turned on or why it turned off. At one point there was a lot of sunlight coming into the cameras and sensors, and that shut the system off, and they couldn't figure out why. And that was creating some, I don't want to necessarily call it frustration, but confusion. And that was part of it as well. So we didn't just get information on how they felt about the drive, also about how they felt about the system itself and how intuitive something may be to use.
And is that part of your process also? You're guiding both the manufacturer on how to basically tweak their designs and their systems, or who's truly your target over here? Are you just worried about the driver himself to be more comfortable, or are the manufacturers using this data to potentially improve their
Well,
systems?
we do define the research question with the research company. As Bob mentioned, we consider ourselves a res tech company. So we aren't, analysts running, heavy duty statistics and doing advanced modeling, but we are very much specialists in the technology side of research. So a company will come to us and with a problem and say, hey, this is what we're looking to do. Um, how can you configure something? We'll come up with it, get the data, and give them a report of the feedback that we've got. And then they take that data and work it into a story. And we work with them as well because some of the stuff is a bit abstract, and come up with a story for their client to try to answer whatever their question may be.
I know you're all bound by confidentiality, but what are your typical clients? Which verticals are they specifically in?
So in this particular instance, the car manufacturer had just rolled out this autonomous driving feature. And ironically, I had just bought the car a week before the study took place, I was not aware that that was even an option in the car, right? So lo and behold, I'm driving on the highway and I put the cruise control on, and all of a sudden my car is driving itself. And I'm like, whoa, what the heck is happening? I'm fighting the steering wheel. And then I realize, I look at the dash and there's a red button that says you're now in the autonomous driving. And I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't even realize. So I just kind of sat back and let the car do what it does. So, that's already like a done deal. In this case, it wasn't a prototype or anything like that. This was already a product that's rolled out. So as Bill was mentioning a few minutes ago, it's twofold. Does the technology work the way it's supposed to? Which, of course, they would not roll this thing out unless the technology was rock solid, ready to go. But, there's other things that factor here, right? Again, and I'm the perfect example. I did not know how to turn off the feature, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm ready to drive the car myself again. And I literally had to try to figure out what to do. So that's number one, is can the user actually activate and deactivate the technology within the car? And then the other part of it, more research oriented, is do they buy into the whole technology? Does it add value to the driving of the car, and so on and so forth? So to be honest, I have no stake in this, in the manufacturer, even though I have the car and whatnot. After my trial period expired, I did not renew the technology within the car, because for me personally, I just felt like, you know what, I don't have any problem driving the car myself, right? So that's my take on it. Bill, I'll turn it over to you in case you have anything else to add.
I think that's pretty good, Bob. I think that ultimately the goal of the research that we were doing here is trying to understand. Well, the professional answer is trying to understand the emotional journey of the respondent or of a driver. But in simpler terms, I think it's about adoption, where, hey, this is kind of out of the box, and we want to get people to start to use this technology, and there's still a lot of hesitancy about turning it on and trusting it. Trust obviously is a big thing, especially when you're in a 6,000-pound vehicle doing 80 miles an hour, all of that, and how to kind of foster the understanding and trust in these systems. Traditionally, this has kind of been a thing with the auto industry in general, right? You can go back to like the Cadillac 864 and things like that were ahead of their time and great, but either people didn't like it or it wasn't completely fleshed out and people didn't trust it and it had to kind of sit on the wayside. Or, I realize I'm on an electric vehicle podcast like the EV1, right? Way back in the day, how all that was executed ahead of its time and didn't really get a lot of buy-in. And now look at where we're at, where I remember when cruise control was flip a switch and it will match a speed and that's it with cables. And now we're trusting it with sensors and all these different things. And we're very much in an electronic world. And you think about, how do I really trust this? How good of a company is this? Do I trust them with my kids in the back seat on this highway? And that all factors in. It all factors into whether or not someone's going to click the system on, set it, get used to it, and to some degree, we did find that it is relaxing for a lot of respondents.
Yeah,
and that's
Bill,
I'm going to
add
so you have a
something
bird's
right
eye view now of several studies.
Yeah.
What are you seeing right now in the real world?
So, the research objective is it stressful? Is it more or less stressful if they drive the car or if the car drives them, right? And going into this project, because we've done a bunch of these over the years, and I think had this study been conducted a few years ago, there would have been no question what the results of the research would have told us, right? Because in previous studies, people were really stressed out when the car was driving them, right? There was no question. The arousal level was through the roof. So when we got this study, came on board, and I said to myself, wow, this is going to be an easy project. We know that they're going to be more relaxed and less stressful when they're driving the car and then when the car is driving them. And to our surprise, it was just the opposite. When the car was driving them, there was less stress. The arousal level was much more leveled off than when they were driving the car themselves. To be honest, I don't know why that was. I'm amazed that that's what the finding was. So Bill, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I know that was a real surprise.
I think some of it is contextual, because when you're on a highway and it's just you in the middle lane and there's no one around you and you can set cruise control and just kind of watch the horizon, right? Like that's very much a relaxing type of thing. And we would see moments of stress. Again, I keep bringing up the 18 wheelers, but we all know when they go past you, they have a I don't want to call it vapor trail, but the car wiggles sometimes depending on what you're doing.
The weight, yeah.
And also with the lane changes, learning to trust the system to actually use the sensors to find. But yeah, by and large, we found that people were mostly more relaxed during the autonomous driving than they were during the self-drive, probably because they had to be less of an active participant or something of that nature.
You want to know
Again, there's
some
still
I mean,
really
I don't own a car, but when I rent a car, I now go to the counter and I say, "Does this have advanced driver assistance?" Like it is a minimum requirement for me. And actually now the rental agency that I rent from, they know me enough, and they put me in the same car at this point because they know it's the one I want. And it's a Fiat, and it has all of the main features of advanced driver assistance, the lane management, it has the adaptive cruise control. And I will tell you, not only am I less stressed, I'm not exhausted when I
yeah,
get where I'm going after on
very
a road
much.
trip because I'm not having to manage all of the aspects of the car. I will say it's a big difference. I don't know. We didn't mention that I live in Europe. I live in Spain, and the driving experience with the adaptive cruise control, 18 wheelers here, they stay in the right lane. They're never passing anybody. They're speed limited much lower than the regular car. So even that, I mean, the experience there, even with huge, they call them heavy goods vehicles here, it's way less stressful for me. And I obviously massively prefer it. I always kind of use this analogy of like the airplane. Rob and I are both pilots. So we like flying airplanes. We like being in the cockpit. We like controlling the plane. But if you're a normal passenger in an airplane, you don't even think about the meat bags in the front of the airplane that are making the thing fly. And the fact that 99% of the time they're just turning a dial to go where you need to go, that there's almost nobody flying that plane most of the time. Obviously you want the comfort and reassurance that there's a professionally trained pilot up there, but otherwise, you're just as happy knowing that it's a computer flying the plane than you are, when it's a computer driving your car. I had the same opinion of as Bob. Like this is going to be a big challenge to drive adoption of this because people are just so used to driving themselves. But I think once they experience it for the first time and get used to, especially with just advanced driver assistance, now fully autonomous, like Rob with his Tesla driving through a construction zone, no less, I would still potentially be nervous about that. But no, I think advanced driver assistance,
so
amen.
I've got two things to add to this conversation, and it's interesting here because I've both got the Tesla full self-driving experience, and I also had the ADS2 on the Kia EV9 that I previously owned. There's something I read on a user group fairly recently, which I thought was perfect, and we talked about whether both you gentlemen are like, oh, surprisingly, people were calming down when they're in the using the autonomous systems. Someone mentioned that you don't take it personally when someone cuts you off when you're driving with an autonomous system because they didn't cut you off, they cut the computer off. You don't take it personally. There's no road rage
Boy.
I
involved.
love that.
Oh boy.
I love that.
You've removed. You're just a passenger. Now, of course, you're a passenger that's still supervising everything, but I really can relate to that comment. I can tell you that. But then there's also the different levels of stress, generally speaking, the way the systems work. The Kia, because I'm a nerd and I like pressing buttons and I like all this stuff, it took me a while to figure it out. And it actually gave you a lot of power, whether it's just going to be auto steer, whether it's going to be just the energy management of accelerating and braking, the adaptive cruise control is separate controls. And when you start with one, it automatically starts the other, but you can discontinue one without the other. It's fairly complicated. There's a learning curve involved. So I think for the average user, that's going to be where they're like, I don't get this, forget it, I'm not using it. There's too many buttons on my steering wheel. And even in its execution, I could also tell you that the way that Kia's technology is good but not great. The way the car changed lanes was pretty mechanical. It's not a complete full self-driving thing. It's more of a highway driving assist, and you can tell it to change lanes on its own. Then I moved over to the full self-driving, the Tesla thing. And yes, I did drive. I made a social media post about how I drove through a construction zone with the flag man going into oncoming traffic. And Needless to say, I was on the ready, but I drove with that car enough. I'm like, I think it can do it. And I'm ready to take over at a moment's notice here. And it did it. It did it amazingly well.
Wow,
Full
that's great.
self-driving Tesla drives like a human being. It still makes mistakes. V14 is about to come out. I can't wait to try that. But even a V13 right now, it's pretty incredible of its capabilities. And once it gains your trust, and it gains it pretty quickly, then you can't imagine yourself letting it do all the things it does at first, right? The first time you see that steering
Sure.
wheel do its own, you're like, whoa, this is weird. The first time you're coming up on a car that's braking in front of you on the highway, like, I don't know, is this gonna work? But eventually you do gain trust in the system. So I'm done with my soapbox. Are you gentlemen seeing that kind of a curve right now, generally from the older systems to what you're working with right now at the moment?
I'd say,
Yeah,
yeah, without a doubt. We a couple of years ago we did projects with the ride sharing manufacturers. There's only two,
Mhm.
and it was in LA, and they were testing 4 cars simultaneously throughout LA, where the participants would just request a car on their phone, and the car would drive up to the curb, pick them up. There was no one in the driver's seat. There was someone in the front seat, but in the passenger seat, just to have a little bit of comfort. Um, and we did that for 2 or 3 days nonstop, just, capturing that, again, physiological response and the facial coding emotional response. And that, again, this was a couple of years ago. Overwhelmingly, it was a stressful situation for most people. First of all, just getting in the car for the first time into a back seat with no one sitting in the driver's seat was definitely emotional, and not positive. Nobody went, "Hey, nobody's driving the car." It was like, "Oh my gosh, there's no one in the driver's seat." I mean, they knew going into the study, but when reality hits, it's a different story, right? It's like, "Oh yeah, autonomous driving. Yeah, I've heard about that. I'm ready to sign up for the study." So, respondents or participants will do it if you pay them enough money. But again, once they get in the car, it's all bets are off, right? It doesn't matter how much you paid them. They're still going to react the way they normally would react. Now, again, nowadays it's a little bit different, right? Especially since Tesla's been around. They've been, Tesla's been doing this for a couple of years now, at least. And now all the other manufacturers are trying to catch up to Tesla, right? So, again, at different levels. The one we just finished, the study we just finished was not the full blown, autonomous driving. It was pretty much self highway driving where the car will drive on the highway. And that was pretty much it. Once that turns off, you have to drive the car again, right? So it goes in and out. And it tells you, hey, the assisted driving is on or the assisted driving is off. So, it's getting there, but I think it still has a way to go. And I'm interested in seeing what the results are, even for just like the study that we just finished. Like if we're probably going to do more iterations because this was really a pilot, right, Bill?
yeah. This was a pilot, and it'll be much stronger powered from a number of respondents standpoint, and we'll be able to have a bigger sample and things like that. And my
So yeah,
prediction is we'll probably see something pretty similar, just
yeah.
based on what all the
Yeah, I'm
preliminary
interested in
testing we've
seeing
done.
that. So, Rob, Bill can share. We'd like to just play back the video that we recorded, during the research so you could see how things were collected and what it looked like.
So, Bill, why don't you show us that video? I'd love for you to walk us through the experience of your test subjects.
Yeah. So what we've got here at the top is it's called GSR. It's galvanic skin response. These are the sensors that go on your fingertips. The way they work is they detect the amount of conductance, electrical conductance that's happening naturally in your fingertips and your sweat glands. And if there's more sweat gland activity, you're more excited or more aroused. If it starts to degrade, you're starting to relax a little bit more, especially after a stressful situation. That's here at the top in the purple. The second one is just heart rate, which is while they're driving, we have an ear clip. This is kind of zoomed in, so there are a few gaps in the data that it fills in later, which is okay. We have fear, which is the purple kind of square waves here, which is when the facial coding detects the fear in the respondent's facial muscle activity. And then surprise is next, followed by engagement, and then joy is all the way at the bottom.
How do you measure both the surprise and engagement? What are those
So
parameters?
facial coding is based off of the work of Dr. Paul Ekman, who did a number of studies that identify like 7 basic human emotions depending on the way that the muscles in the face contract in the facial expressions that you make. So there are, there are activity levels that you can get with a camera that match templated data for facial expressions, and then that tells us whether or not the, emotion is felt or not.
Yeah, let me jump in
So
here, Bill, real quick. So, from
sure.
a technology standpoint, with facial coding, we are mapping, 25 areas of a participant's face. And those translate to the 7 basic emotions that Bill mentioned, which are fear, anger, disgust, joy, sadness, contempt, and surprise. Now, for a lot of projects, there's no fear, there's no sadness. And so we illustrate the ones that are most applicable, right? So, and look at the snapshot that we're showing here. We are capturing, on video, right, the respondents, right? So we can collect that facial coding information. We also have biometrics hooked up to the respondent's fingers so we can measure levels of arousal and heart rate. So there's a bunch of measures taking place here, right? And again, the purpose of all this data collection is to help us satisfy the research objective, which was, is this a stressful situation is it more or less stressful when they're driving themselves and then when the car is driving them? So we had a camera shooting out the windshield, the front windshield. So you could see, hey, if they're in traffic or whatever, how that's affecting that physiological response, right? Or that emotional response. And then you could, you look at the timeline below and just easily pinpoint everything that was taking place at that moment and understand exactly, what that experience was like, during the driving exercise.
Awesome. Bill, are you going to play this
Yeah,
down?
Yeah.
I'd love to see how this whole thing unfolds right now.
sure. So to start with, I'm just going to kind of point out what's happening here. You can see that I guess that's a red Jeep on the left-hand side is executing a lane change, and the driver is watching what's happening. Um, anyone notice what's happening with the red Jeep? No turn
Yeah,
signal.
No
yeah,
turn
No,
he's
signal.
he's
Yeah.
changed lanes quick, no turn signal.
no
Kind of
signal.
close. Yeah.
So you can see that where the GSR was kind of degrading here as they were kind of, getting back to kind of relax and a bit of stasis, if you will. All of a sudden we start to come back up, and there's fear and surprise for this one, and also engagement. So they're kind of paying attention. And for this study, we were looking for stress, and it's important in these types of contexts to define what stress means. So we can't just say, hey, get me a widget that gets you stress, because that really doesn't exist. Are we looking at heart rate? This is heart rate, GSR, and different facial muscle movement, right, going on. And it's kind of a aggregate of all of those to see what the respondent may be thinking. So here you can see, there's heart rate activity, there's GSR, and all kinds of different things, depending on what's going on with that Jeep in front of them. So
So Bill,
as
just to reiterate, now this is the automated driving scenario, right? This is, you can
yes,
see he doesn't have the hand on the wheel, right? So he's just kind of sitting back, letting the car drive itself.
Yeah, and it's funny here watching this because once again, from my own anecdotal experience, the most stressful times for me when I'm on the highway is when a car is coming in pretty tight, and you want to know, does it recognize it? Once again, here, this is not per se the badmouth Kia versus Tesla, but Tesla's system is clearly more advanced. I found those, I don't even call it an edge case, but in those cases, the Kia did not handle it well. It either didn't acknowledge the car was there or acknowledged it way too late. You came seemingly within inches or feet of someone's bumper at highway speed. It's like it was too tight. The Tesla seemed to manage it better. At least that's from my observation. And we were talking before about road rage. Was what I found was interesting with the Kia system was because it drives like a robot, not like a human being. It sort of hovers in people's blind spots sometimes. I think
Yeah.
subconsciously, when
oh
someone's
boy,
merging into a highway, you either speed up to shut the door on them so they get in behind you, or you drop back to let them in. The autonomous system with the Kia would just keep going at a steady speed, which drives certain people crazy because they don't know which way you want to go, and then they got more
Right.
aggressive with me. So I found that ironically that triggered. You need those monitors on the other people as well when you're using the system. I think that'll create a more complete system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we work on a lot of these projects, and I have to say, every project we work on, I mentioned earlier, is different, but everyone is very exciting, right? Like, we can't wait to see what the data is telling us, right? We can't wait to see what the research findings are because sometimes it's what you thought. And I mentioned in this project we just worked on, I thought it was going to be just the opposite, right? So sometimes the research results will be surprising to everyone. Right now, obviously, the manufacturer wanted things to go the way they went. But, from a practical standpoint, from a research standpoint, from a human behavior standpoint, you know, uh, I think everyone kind of thought it was going to go the other way, but it didn't. So that was definitely surprising. And that's not uncommon in research that the data provides surprising results that go against what you thought before the research started. And it happens a lot.
So the takeaway here is even though different technologies going at different paces, I'm sure Kia is going to catch up as well. And there's a lot of other players in the field, obviously Ford, GM, and Waymo, and many, many more. Every manufacturer, BMW, is working on a system right now. But you continue to see this curve that as the consumer has more confidence, their stress level goes down. They're much more accepting of
Yeah.
autonomous driving. So paint to us a bigger picture of where you believe we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years.
I'm going to jump in here real fast because I've already experienced this on a different level with previous technologies, right? So I'll give you a real good example. When the internet first emerged, and we're talking 20 years ago, right? We did tons of research, right? And everything was, how are we going to get people to buy something online, right? And everyone had a story about someone they knew who had their credit card stolen or whatever, right? And we are
I
in the same
remember.
exact situation now where everyone says, oh, I heard there was an accident. Someone got killed because the car was driving themselves, right? And you go, okay, statistically, do you know that it saves thousands of lives a year because the car is driving itself? So we're at that same point now where like the internet now, who even thinks about not being able to buy something online? Everyone buys everything online, right? It's just like, it's human nature now, right? It's like, yeah, I'm not even going to go to the store. I'm just going to buy it online. So that's what's going to happen with the car thing, right? At some point, everyone's going to just jump in the car and take me where I need to go. And it's going to happen. No one's going to think twice about it. Yeah, there'll be an accident here along the way, but there's so many more accidents when people drive the car themselves that
Yeah.
it's going
Yeah.
to be a non-issue. So, it'll take, I don't know how long it's going to take. It'll take time, but we're going to get to where it's like, it's a no-brainer. It's, hey, yeah, here's where I want to go. Now we do it with the GPS, right? To get where we want to go direction-wise. But now we're getting to the point where the car not only will get us where we need to go, but it will drive us there, right? So I think we're heading in that direction, and I don't know what the time frame is going to be, but we're going to get to a point where you don't even have to think about it anymore. And you're going to be relieved when you get in the car. It's like, I'm just going to hit the button and the car's going to take me where I need to go. And, I'll be happy when I get there. So I think that's where we're heading, right?
I always say it's like when Uber came out, your parents always told you not to get into a stranger's car, and then of course, and then when the internet came out, your parents always told you don't meet people off the internet. It's weird, so now we meet strangers off the internet and get in their car. It's the exact same thing. Bill, go
Yeah.
Yeah.
ahead.
I mean, I'm similar to Bob. I mean, the more it becomes ubiquitous in vehicles and the more people get used to it, eventually, like I see in the next 5 to 10 years, it continuing this pace, actually probably even accelerating. I think there's going to be more wide use of autonomous driving once the initial shock and whatever wears off. Like I recognize I'm talking on an electric vehicle podcast right now, looking out my window at an electric vehicle, and it wasn't that long ago that everyone was saying, "Oh, that's just a flash in the pan. I'm never going to this and that." And there's charging stations here at every Wawa and all over the place because hey, it's here and it's going to stay. And the more people get used to it, and the more comfortable they get, it's just going to continue. I would imagine that it was probably something similar back in the '60s when they decided, hey, we're gonna go to power steering. I'm sure there were
Mhm.
people who were saying, I like to feel the road. This is too floaty. I can spin it with one finger. I'm not in control. I don't want this. I want my manual steering box. I don't know the last time I even saw a vehicle that
Oh my
wasn't
God.
vintage that had a manual box in it, right? but there is still a bit of a block regarding the trust of the technology still. As much as, oh, we may talk to someone who, oh, I love it. I completely trust it implicitly. I use it all the time. And okay, cool. Do me a favor. Let's get in your car, set the adaptive cruise to, set it to 25 miles an hour, point it at a brick wall, and let's just kind of sit back and see what happens. They will probably get nervous, right?
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of that's kind of a bit of a block. But again, the more people use it, the more accessible it is. Like that's why it's great that it's in Teslas and BMWs and things like that. But to kind of the everyday person who may be going to get a Kia or a Honda or something like that, seeing the technology in all across the industry is also going to help foster the adoption of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one thing that I think is going to foster the adoption is the statistics that come out of the self-driving accidents and deaths every year and this and that. And once that happens and people like really that starts to sink in, I could tell you, I have two daughters who just started driving, and I can see like a few years from now, before they leave the house, I'm going to say, don't forget to put the automatic driving feature on in the car, especially if I know they're going to drive on the highway, right? It's like, it's just one more layer of comfort, right? I don't have to worry about them getting too close to another car and, whatever. So I think we're going to get to that point where the statistics start to drive, the comfort level and everything else that goes along with it.
We can already see here Waymo and Tesla have, Waymo is literally on the street working, expanding like crazy. Tesla's not quite there yet. They still have their safety driver. I know from my personal experience, it's really close, but it's getting there. All the other manufacturers are going to catch up as well eventually. And what I can tell you is my realization from using full self-driving system that works most of the time is you realize that car has way more sets of eyes than I do. And I realize in many situations, I pride myself on being, hey, I'm the best driver in the room over here. I'm better than you. I'm better than everyone. Of course, that's what I believe. Everyone else is going to feel probably the exact same thing. And I've been humbled by using the full self-driving system, the way it manages traffic in complicated situations. I'm like, I think it did it better than I would have done it. I would have hesitated to merge into this lane right now because I'm watching this stuff going on. This guy's braking in front of me, and there's a little bit of a window here, but that guy's accelerating from behind. I don't think there's a gap there. And it does it, and I double check because you can see the whole layout of your awareness of the traffic around you on the full self-driving. And I'm like, oh yeah, it sees this car coming up. It sees this one here. It sees there's clearly a gap, and it moves in there. I'm like, it made it easy where I would have hesitated.
Well, I mean, I think you said it perfectly. Like, obviously, you don't have eyes in the back of your head. You can't look. You don't have a 360-degree view of what's happening in the situation, whereas the computer does. It has eyes in the front, the back, the side, and the bumpers. It has, acoustic sensors, all these things. You just can't take in that amount of data and react.
Driver's ed, Scott, when you made a lane change, what was the first thing you had to do?
Well,
you remember?
Lean forward, check your mirrors, look over your shoulder.
Your blind spot, exactly.
Yeah,
Don't
but
just look your mirrors, look over your blind spot. I'm looking over my blind spot, which you need to do, but now I'm not looking for a moment ahead where someone may be jamming on their brakes.
And you're almost never looking behind you. And the car is always looking behind you. It's always looking everywhere. So it's.
Yeah. And again, using my daughters as an example, every time they drive and I'm in the passenger seat and we're like switching lanes, I go, don't forget, you have to turn your head and look at the blind spot, right? It's not being able to have to do that is going to be so much nicer, then I don't have to say it every time I'm in the car, right? They'll just know, or the car will
here's
know.
the one negative takeaway. People's driving skills may atrophy or may never even develop properly when we're fully relying on this. Scott was talking about pilot and
who cares?
And autopilot. And you're right. And maybe it really doesn't matter anymore.
Well, and listen, I mean, if you look at the demographics of who's driving now, the young people, they don't want cars. They don't want to drive. People who used to, when we were kids, we all couldn't wait for our 16th birthday to go get our driver's license. And now none of these kids give a fuck about that. They don't care about driving a car, having a car. I mean, very rarely in these really, really suburban areas do you see a kid getting a car for their 16th birthday. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous these days for that to even be a thing. So I think I mean, to your point, Rob, yeah, it's people's driving skills are going to maybe atrophy, but who cares? You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
there
I hate to
it's
keep bringing up automotive history here, but like,
no,
raise your
well, we
hand
love
if
it.
you can, real quick, 5 seconds. Name a car that still comes with a manual transmission.
I knew you were going there with
You,
that one. Yeah.
Well,
I'm just softballing it in there for you. Like,
no, in Europe I can say yes, but
You
you're
still see
totally
him in
right.
Europe.
You're totally right.
at least in the States, and
No, no, yeah.
no
It's a
way
custom
can I
order.
shift
It's a
that
custom order.
6 speed. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you
So
don't need that skill anymore.
so
No,
Bill, just,
You're actually more likely to get it in an EV for the fun of it than you are to get it in a petrol car. There's all these EV
yeah, faux
manufacturers like
shifters.
Everati,
Yeah.
you know.
So it's interesting. So Bill, you're absolutely correct. I grew up on learning how to drive a stick. Yeah, I'm a real automotive, enthusiast, and that to me is something I miss dearly. Of course, that was really important in the beginning. You need to learn how to drive a stick. You never know when you'll have to get behind the wheel of one. No, you really, in the U.S., you don't anymore. In Europe, this still exists. I went over to Portugal last year. I had to rent a car, and I had two options. One was an EV, which normally I would have leapt all over. This was this was right after I purchased my first EV, or a manual stick. And I'm like, I'm going for the stick because that is a dying breed. You're not, I don't know how many more times in my life I'm going to have the opportunity to drive a 5-speed because they just basically they've gone the way of the dodo bird and they're completely gone. This also reminds me of years and years ago. Met my uncle at some party, some family reunion get together, and he was late. Why were you? Yeah, hey, what happened? We missed you. Got lost on the way here. He was driving his nice new BMW at the time. I'm like, your car comes with GPS. I'm pretty sure it just comes with standard equipment. He's like, yeah, but I don't want my skills to atrophy. I don't want to be dependent on this. I want to
oh,
know
jeez.
my surroundings and how to get there. That was his honest answer, and he meant it. By the way, he uses GPS now, but in the beginning,
he's not printing his MapQuest pages out and getting his directions out.
I remember those days, Scott.
We always did that. That was
Yeah, but
those are the
to me,
days.
that's really the closest analogy of like giving up control is like going from things we used to do manually, like steering or shifting, to trusting
totally true.
the equipment to do it. And it's kind of the same way. I mean, same blind spots are a great one. Years ago, I'm not going to name the vehicle, but I bought I guess, a SUV type thing, a crossover, and the blind spot was large enough that even if you turned your head, I lost a minivan in that blind spot.
Yeah.
I didn't get in an accident.
Oh yeah.
But it's I immediately pulled into the next Pep Boys or whatever and got those little stick-on things and
The mirrors.
had supplementary mirrors. And I was driving around for years in that thing, and whenever I would see the same model, they would always have those mirrors on there. So it was very difficult. And now I that's one of my favorite, driver assistant things out there is blind spot assistance.
Yes.
And there's no way I'd be able to monitor everything. And now I don't have to take my eyes off the road in front. I don't have to rear end somebody because I was looking over my shoulder or whatever. And all that stuff is now, I don't want to say taken for granted, but we all know that that's there. And the next level is the autonomous driving. And yeah, I mean, I'll admit, I'm pretty sure that the computer with radar and everything it's got is going to do better than me with no coffee after a long night. Who knows? It it's just going to be a question of trust, trust, and then hey, it's here to stay, and the big companies are doing their due diligence developing it properly.
So supposedly Tesla now with the new software, what I read was when it detects you're being sleepy, through your eye movement and through wandering on the lanes, in the Kia it would detect that as well. It would say time for a coffee break. It would say, pull over and
the little coffee break light.
Yeah. Check yourself. The Tesla now says, it looks like you're getting sleepy. Why don't you turn on the autonomous driving? So they actually tell you not to pull over. Use the autonomy. We have that much confidence that it's better. And another big concern, which I've noticed, you see it on social media, you see it everywhere, is people like, it's dangerous. This is just a sort of a license for you to basically dilly-dally and not pay attention to the road. And what I've also found with the increase in technology of how good the autonomous driving is also the increase of monitoring you and paying attention to how you're paying attention. And I found that on the Tesla, it's absolutely remarkable how well it does that. It forces you to pay attention. Even when you're looking at the map, you're looking at the screen and you're still, dilly-dallying. You got a text, something has distracted you. Your eyes are off the road for more than 3 seconds. It will let you know, and in a hurry, that, hey, man, this is eyes on the road. Pay attention. Do that on your own time. And it works remarkably well. So I think that's also another technology advantage that comes with all of these systems. But on that note, and obviously here I'm ringing the bell here for Tesla. Yes, I'm a fan of the technology. That's the reason why I got one. But do you see, Bill and Bob, do you see the other manufacturers catching up with just your anecdotal studies right now? Are we going to hit a place of parity eventually in your minds where all these systems are just going to be different flavors of the same thing?
I'll jump in here. I think they are going to catch up. I don't know how long that's going to take, but as I mentioned, I just got a brand new car, an SUV, and we just did the study based on the self-driving feature that the car offers, and I could easily see that they're taking baby steps to get to where they need to be, right? And when I was driving it for the first time and it activated, I had a false sense of security because I assumed the car knew where I was driving, right? Because I put the GPS information in the car, right? For it to tell me, what the directions were. But I assumed that the self-driving was going to synchronize with the GPS, right? So here I am sitting back and I'm like, oh my God, this is great. I don't have to do anything. Oh my God, look at it's making a turn. And then it blows right past my exit. And I go, oh my gosh, I
How about that
forgot.
part?
It didn't know where I was going. It just kept me in my lane while I was driving on the highway, but it wasn't synchronized to the GPS. So again, I realized, oh, geez, okay, there's only half the equation here, right? So that's why I say they're taking baby steps to get to where they need to be. But again, I guess that's a first step. But, I was not thinking that way. I had a different mindset. I was thinking the car was going to get me where I needed to go. I don't have to think about it. But obviously that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the manufacturer and how, how forward thinking and how conservative they may be as to what they're going to do. I mean, I know that, everyone knows that Volvo was known for safety for years and years and years with seat
Yes.
belts and what have you. And we work with eye tracking technology a lot. Like it's one of our things for the past 20 years. Eye tracking has been a big deal. And one of our major equipment providers actually partnered with Volvo many years ago to start developing eye tracking technology in vehicles to be able to detect when people are keeping their eyes off the road, and with infrared cameras that are pupil tracking and things like that. So there is a lot going on behind the scenes, but like I said, I think it boils down to how aggressive in development the company may be versus how conservative the brand is. You'd expect something different from Jaguar or whoever. So
Yeah,
That's
and I
wonderful.
think when someone buys a new car, that's one of the things they're going to look for, like in the
Oh
near
yeah,
future.
yeah.
Like, hey, does this car do this, this, and this, right? And if that's the case, then the adoption is going to go through the roof because cars are just automatically going to come with all those features: self-driving, direction, GPS, everything. I mean, I remember when GPS first came out. I'll do that real quick. It was always like an option, right? I remember if you wanted to get it on your phone, you had to pay a certain amount of money per month to Apple to get, GPS. And now it's like, oh my gosh, of course it has to be on the phone, right? And that's going to be the same way in the cars, right? Not just GPS, but self-driving, autonomous driving, everything going to be built into the car from now on. And, we're getting there, slowly but surely.
No, there's no question. The tipping point is near, and you can just look at China with BYD, and they're giving this God's eye thing on the cheapest $17,000 vehicle gets its standard. It's absolutely, positively going to happen. Just a question of when, but it's lovely to see here where our progress is going. And you guys have really given us a terrific snapshot on where autonomous driving is right now. So we've come up on time right now, gentlemen. Can you really, can you let the listeners at home know where they can either find you or IVP Research online?
Sure. Our URL is IVP, as in Peter, Research Labs with an S.com, IVPResearchLabs.com. That's the easiest way to find us. You'll see what we do. There's examples of what we do. And, we like being at the forefront, of all this technology, not just for cars, but for everything, right? Like we've been working with Apple 20 years ago, right? So we have all these like insights into where things are going, and it's really exciting, and we're happy to be a part of it.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Bob and Bill, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight in the roadmap of how autonomy is really going to kind of shape our future. That is it for this episode of the Urban EV Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you enjoyed this conversation and want to support the show, leave us a review and share this episode with a friend or colleague. The road to sustainability starts at the plug, and that's why we're here. We will see you all next week with a new episode of the Urban EV Podcast.